Okay, so you want to run a medieval slave trading business. It is the late 14th century, and you are standing at Kaffa, the Genoese colony on the Crimean coast. Grain comes down from the steppe. Wax, hides, fish, timber, and fur pass through the warehouses. Ships leave for Constantinople, the Aegean, Sicily, and Genoa. Human beings are sold here too. You are not going inland to seize them yourself. Soldiers, raiders, pirates, frontier lords, and armed bands do that work. You enter later, after captives have been marched toward the coast, and pass to an intermediary. The plan is straightforward. Buy people where warfare has made captives available. Put them aboard a ship already sailing west. Sell them where buyers will pay more. Buy in Kaffa. Sell in the Mediterranean. Keep the difference. Except distance is doing more than moving merchandise. A captive does not become more productive simply by crossing the sea. Distance raises the buyer's control. It separates the captive from family, language, local protection, and anyone likely to challenge the sale. Every mile makes rescue harder and return less likely. Your margin begins with that separation. Kaffa is useful because several commercial systems meet here. Genoese officials govern the colony. Italian merchants bring money, ships, and contacts. Warfare and raiding bring captives out of the steppe and the Caucasus. Brokers connect the people holding those captives with merchants willing to buy them. The person standing in front of you may already have been sold several times. She may have been seized during a raid, taken after a military defeat, surrendered with other prisoners, kidnapped or sold onward by an armed group that had no use for her except as something exchangeable. By the time she reaches you, most of that history has disappeared. What remains is a broker, a claim about her origin and legal status, and an asking price. Physical possession is not enough. You need later buyers to accept that possession as something you can transfer. A captive identified as Latin Christian might create serious trouble in a Genoese port. Someone described as Tatar, Circassian, Russian, Abkhaz, or belonging to another Black Sea population might be treated differently. Religion, origin, age, sex, and the alleged circumstances of enslavement can all affect whether officials allow the transaction to proceed. The broker helps with this. He does not merely introduce buyer and seller. He helps present a contested human being as saleable property. Then comes the notary. Later medieval slave sales survive because notaries recorded them. A sale instrument could identify the parties, describe the enslaved person, state a price, and place the transfer into a legal form that another merchant or household might recognize. It did not establish what happened at the beginning of the chain. It did not prove that the captive had been lawfully seized. It documented the sale taking place in front of the notary. For your purposes, that may be enough. Violence gives the seller possession. Documentation makes that possession easier to resell. You inspect the captives on offer. Young women were sought in Mediterranean markets for domestic and household labor. Men could be sold for agricultural work, workshops, ships, or military markets farther east and south. Children and adolescents, interested buyers who expected many years of service and assumed that the young could be forced more easily into a new language and household. You look at teeth, limbs, skin, old injuries, and visible signs of illness. You ask an age, although the answer may be guessed or altered. You ask about origin, because origin will appear in the description and may affect the sale. You watch each person stand and walk. This is not care. It is valuation. A cough can lower an offer. A damaged leg can remove a class of buyer. An uncertain legal status can leave you holding someone whom no reputable purchaser wants to touch. Suppose you buy 10 captives. That is enough to make the journey worthwhile, but not enough to justify hiring an entire vessel. You book room on an ordinary merchant ship carrying grain, wax, hides, timber, or other cargo. This is not a medieval version of the later Atlantic slave ship. The captives are one part of a mixed load. To see how the venture works, divide your starting capital into 100 shares. This is a model, not a surviving account. Roughly 3/4 go into the purchases. The exact proportion could change from one voyage to another, but acquisition is the obvious weight in the account. Before departure, most of your money has already been exchanged for control over 10 people. The remaining quarter has a great deal to cover. There is the broker, the notary, and whatever taxes or customs apply. There is temporary confinement while you wait for a ship, food, and water during that wait, supervision on the way to the quay, and payment to the shipmaster. If the route requires another vessel, another port, or another broker, the spending continues. You also need a reserve. A ship may leave late. An official may question the documents. A port may become unsafe after a diplomatic dispute. A buyer may not appear when expected. Your money is no longer in your purse. It is tied up in people you have not yet sold. Until departure, they have to be held somewhere secure. For a group this size, you would not build a prison. You would pay for access to a locked room, enclosed yard, warehouse space, or some other guarded place arranged through local contacts. The important part is supervision. Wax stays where it is stacked. A captive does not. Whenever the group moves, to the notary, through the streets, onto the quay, you need enough armed help to prevent escape or resistance. The number depends on the place and the people involved, but the expense lasts as long as the delay does. The same is true of food. From your side of the ledger, the incentive is to spend as little as possible while keeping each captive alive and saleable. Bread, porridge, legumes, onions, salted food, and water are ordinary possibilities, depending on what is available. Comfort does not enter the calculation. Condition does. A person who reaches market visibly weakened will attract lower offers. A sick captive may be rejected. A dead one brings nothing at all. The same cold arithmetic applies to shelter and clothing. A cheap saving before departure can become a much larger loss by the time the ship reaches another port. Food is maintenance of inventory. That is how the account treats it. Now the main financial problem appears. Your largest payment came first. Your revenue comes last. Every day between them costs money. A delayed ship means more food and more guarding. It also gives captives more time to study the room, the doors, the streets, and the people watching them. A diplomatic dispute can close a route or expose Italian merchants to reprisals. Illness can keep the group ashore. None of this needs to destroy the venture. A week of delay is enough to make it worse. So you may accept a route with transshipment rather than wait for a direct voyage to Genoa. A vessel heading through the Bosporus to a familiar commercial station in the Aegean gets your capital moving. From there, you can find another ship west. Changing ships adds fees and handling. Waiting also has a price. Before embarkation, everyone is counted. The shipmaster wants payment for space, provisions, inconvenience, and whatever extra burden the captives place on his crew. He also wants the contract to make clear who bears the loss if one of them dies. Unless part of that risk has been shifted by agreement, it is yours. The master has sold you passage. He has not promised that every captive will arrive healthy and ready for market. If someone dies, your purchase money disappears with that person. The ship owner still expects his freight. This makes the vessel's condition and schedule commercially important. You want a competent master, enough water, and a ship likely to leave when promised. The master, meanwhile, compares your group with easier cargo. Grain sacks can be stacked. Cloth does not need to drink. Wax does not resist the crew. Captives require room, access to provisions, and continued supervision. They may become ill. They may attack someone or try to escape in port. The master can demand more money or refuse them altogether. Once aboard, they are confined wherever the ship can secure them without preventing the crew from working. Medieval evidence does not give us one standard arrangement, and ordinary merchant vessels were not built to a single design for carrying captives. Conditions would depend on the ship, the route, the weather, and the judgment of the master. What matters to you is control. Movement is limited. Access to the deck is watched. Restraints can be used when the crew fears escape or resistance, especially during loading and stops in port. At sea, the water becomes part of the prison. A captive who does not know the vessel, the route, or the language of the crew has nowhere easy to go. But that does not produce obedience. It only narrows the available choices. Someone can refuse food. Someone can strike a guard when moved. Captives who share a language can plan together. A person who recognizes the coast may try to reach the quay or jump into the harbor. Others may conceal illness or resist in ways that leave little trace in a merchant's paperwork. You answer by watching more closely, separating people who can coordinate, controlling access to tools, and counting everyone whenever the ship enters port. Open resistance brings force. Each measure protects your investment by removing another person's choices. By now, the purchase price is only part of the cost. Return to the model of 100 shares. Around 75 have gone into acquisition. Brokerage, documentation, local charges, confinement, provisions, supervision, freight, and handling consume most of what remains. No money has come back. The final sale must recover more than the original price of the captives. It must pay for every day they were held, every meal, every fee, every transfer, and every failed attempt to find a buyer. The people who reach market must also cover those who do not. If one of the 10 dies, you do not merely lose 1/10 of an expected profit. You lose the purchase payment attached to that person and everything spent transporting and maintaining her. The other 9 now have to earn enough to cover that loss. If another escapes during transshipment, 8 saleable captives carry costs incurred for 10. That is how an attractive price difference can vanish before the ship reaches the Western Mediterranean. It also explains why the cheapest person is not always the best purchase. You want captives likely to survive the journey and attract several buyers at the destination. Youth, condition, skills, legal status, and current demand can matter more than a low asking price. A bargain may be cheap because other merchants have noticed something you have not. Perhaps the captive is sick. Perhaps relatives are close enough to challenge the sale. Perhaps the claimed origin is false. Perhaps the person can speak to local officials and dispute the seller's story. Perhaps the authorities have become stricter about selling people from a particular religious community. A low price at Kaffa means little if the person cannot be sold later. The ship passes through the Bosporus. This is a commercial route, but also a political one. Authorities inspect cargo. Port officials examine documents. Customs are collected. Treaties protect merchants until a dispute makes those protections unreliable. The slave trade did not belong neatly to a Christian market on one side and a Muslim market on the other. Genoese, Venetian, Byzantine, Turkic, and Mamluk interests overlapped. Christian merchants sold to Christian purchasers and participated in routes connected to Muslim demand. Political leaders might condemn a transaction when it strengthened an enemy, then tolerate or tax similar commerce when it served local interests. Religion shaped who could be enslaved, where they could be sold, and which trades attracted political opposition. It did not stop exchange. The Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt created an important demand for enslaved males from lands around and beyond the Black Sea. Italian merchants could profit from commerce connected to that demand. Advocates of crusade objected because these sales helped sustain the military power of a Muslim state. Restrictions on that trade were not only statements of belief, they were instruments of war and diplomacy. When Genoese or Venetian actions interfered with Mamluk access to enslaved recruits, Mamluk rulers could retaliate against Italian merchants living in their cities. Shops, goods, freedom, and personal safety became bargaining pieces in a conflict that might have begun hundreds of miles away. Your small venture sits inside that network. A change in relations between rulers can alter the safety of a port before your ship arrives. At each stop, you present the documents and pay the charges that cannot be avoided. A ship's agent finds the next passage. A broker locates buyers or another intermediary. An official may decide that a document is inadequate. Money might solve that problem, but a bribe is not a regular tariff you can enter neatly in advance. It occurs when one official has the power to delay you and expects payment for not using it. On another voyage, the demand may never appear. Ordinary fees are predictable enough. Informal payments are not. After weeks of movement, the group reaches a Western market. The long cash flow gap is nearly over. The surviving captives are there. The documents are still with you. Buyers can inspect them. Arrival, however, is not payment. A wealthy household may want a young woman for cooking, cleaning, childcare, textile work, or personal service. A craftsman may want an assistant whose labor can be controlled more completely than that of a hired worker. A rural buyer may seek agricultural labor. Another dealer may buy for resale farther inland. Each values the same captive differently. Some knowledge of Greek or Italian may make a person easier to place in a household. A claimed skill can raise an offer. Youth and apparent health help. Scars, injuries, or a persistent cough reduce the price. A doubtful legal status can end the negotiation. You can sell the group quickly to another dealer, accept a lower total, and recover your coin. Or you can sell one by one and wait for buyers willing to pay more. Selling individually may increase the final proceeds. It also keeps your money tied up. Every additional day brings another meal and another need for supervision. More importantly, it delays your next purchase. Grain may be cheap in the harbor. Wax may have just arrived. A share in a ship may be offered below its usual price. You cannot act because your capital is still locked in a room with the people you intend to sell. This is where an expected profit and usable cash part company. A captive may be worth more on paper than you paid in kaffa until someone gives you coin or a promise of payment you trust. That higher value cannot finance another voyage. A buyer may offer more if allowed to pay later. Accepting turns one risk into another. You no longer have to prevent the captive from escaping. Now you have to make the buyer pay his debt. If your ship east leaves soon, a smaller payment in coin may be more useful than a larger sum promised months from now. So you begin to sell. One captive attracts competing household buyers and brings a strong markup. Another has language or domestic skills and sells quickly. A third has been coughing since the voyage. Buyers offer less. You can keep paying for food and confinement in the hope that his condition improves, or take the discount and free the money. You take the discount. Two more go to a purchaser moving inland. Another sale pauses while a notary examines the earlier document. The transfer eventually proceeds, but you have paid for several extra days. One by one, the surviving captives leave your control and enter someone else's. Now close the account. You began with 10 people and 100 shares of capital. Purchases consumed about 3/4 in our representative model. Fees, confinement, provision, supervision, and transport absorbed most of the rest. A death or escape would leave the survivors carrying expenses incurred for people who produced no sale revenue. If all 10 arrive in saleable condition and Western buyers pay substantially more than the CAFA prices, you can earn a worthwhile return. If only 8 reach sale and one must be heavily discounted, much of the apparent margin disappears. The result turns on how much of your purchased value survives to market and how quickly you can convert it back into money. That is what the operation has been protecting from the beginning. You buy people already separated from protection by violence or coercion. The notary makes control easier to transfer. Walls, guards, restraints, ships, and unfamiliar territory stop the captives from leaving. At the destination, the very distance that isolates them makes their labor easier for the buyer to command. The logistical tools look familiar because merchants use them everywhere. Here, the cargo changes what those tools do. Food keeps a captive saleable. A guard earns wages by preventing someone from recovering her freedom. A contract turns domination into a claim another buyer may accept. Transport carries the captive away from the people, most likely to know who she is, understand her language, and challenge the seller. One surviving later medieval record names a young Bosnian woman called Ivica. She was one of thousands of young women caught in this trade. The document preserves her because a sale needed to be recorded. It does not preserve the moment she was taken. It does not tell us whom she lost, whether she resisted, what she called home, or whether she ever saw it again. The price mattered to the transaction. Her experience did not. That silence is built into the archive. Merchants needed evidence of payment and transfer. They did not need receipts for the destruction that made the sale possible. This medieval trade was not identical to the later Atlantic plantation system. A venture like yours is smaller. The ship carries mixed cargo rather than being constructed solely for mass human transport. Buyers may be households, workshops, farms, courts, other merchants, or military systems. Enslavement is shaped by war, religion, frontier politics, and local legal status rather than by the fully developed racial order associated with later Atlantic slavery. The differences matter. So does the transaction underneath them. Someone claims the power to sell a person. Someone else pays for that power. Force prevents the person being sold from refusing. Without force, there is no merchandise. You can make the venture financially safer. Carry wax or hides alongside the captives so ordinary cargo produces cash if human sales are delayed. Form a partnership so one death does not fall entirely on you. Buy fewer people and concentrate on those likely to attract household buyers. Avoid a politically exposed route even if its expected prices are higher. All sensible decisions. None changes where the margin comes from. The broker is paid because someone has been made captive. The notary earns a fee because control must be transferred. The guard earns wages because the captive wants to leave. The shipmaster earns freight because the buyer is far from the place of capture. The customs authority collects money because an enslaved person is being moved through its jurisdiction. Your profit grows when isolation gives the final buyer more power. A successful voyage does not show that the trade operated without violence. It shows that violence had been made regular enough to pass through a harbor as business. Now look again at Kaffa. Grain, wax, hides, and human beings enter the same warehouses, contracts, ships, and markets. All can be assigned a price. All can be moved west and sold. But grain has no family waiting inland. Wax does not resist. A hide cannot tell a notary that it was stolen. Human cargo has to be watched, confined, threatened, and carried beyond the reach of rescue before the merchant can safely collect his margin. That is the business, making freedom harder to recover.